Right, I'll give folks one more minute. And if you can help our facilitators out, if your table is missing the handouts, if you want to raise your hand, that way they can make sure they got everybody. Okay. Okay. All right. So yesterday, you did a couple of things in this space. One of the things you did was you did a little bit of that kind of introspective work, just starting to get a feel for what types of things you might be interested in. And then in the panel, you got to kind of hear about what research is like and a little bit about different types of research that folks were interested in. So in this session, what we're hoping we can start to do is help you identify how those people got there by having a research question. So a research question generally is the kind of the output of some type of observation. So how do you, what is a good research question? How do people come up with research questions? That's kind of the space that we're going to explore together during this session. So I have been involved in way too many research projects to list in a short period of time. I have done wonderful field research experiments where I've drugged for ticks for entire summers. Really wonderful. Walking around with a blanket covered in pesticides trying to get rid of or pick up ticks is great for a teenager. I've done work on yeast, I've done work in a couple of other areas, and all of them, even though they might have been really complex types of projects, they all started off with some basic questions. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. These are 4 pictures. These are baker's yeast. So if you've ever baked bread or if you're a person that does a little bit of brewing, same type of yeast. And so these little black and white pictures are just the yeast on their own. They're these little single-celled eukaryotic organisms. They're wonderful little creatures. They don't have great conversations. They're not good about that. But they also like to find other yeast cells and then fuse with them and make little yeast offspring. So that's what's happening in these pictures. These are regular yeast, and these are yeast that have been given the signal to go out and find a friend. And these green images are pictures of a GFP tagged protein, and we wanted to know what's going on with this protein, where does it go? And what we noticed was that this protein, there's a ton of it, and it changes locations before and after they've gotten this signal that they should go and find somebody. So we had all these questions like, why do they do this? What is this protein doing there in the first place? Why does it go to this place and not some other place? How do the cells know which direction to go? How do the cells know when to stop? How do the cells know something is too far away and they shouldn't go there in the first place? How do the cells put all the stuff back once they're done? How do the cells fuse all the things together to make 4 new cells? All these questions basically are embedded in these little pictures. So what looks like, and my graduate advisor's, his favorite question was, how do you know the green thing is what you say the green thing is? There was that was but you told us. And he's like, well, how do you know? Because you told us. Anyway, so what seems like really simple observations and really simple things, or sometimes really complicated things, there are lots of questions that can come about. And sometimes complicated things have really simple questions that can come about. So what we really want to do is give folks an opportunity to just kind of play with asking questions. Again, as Carlos said, fail with gusto. This is not a graded activity. This is not a super judgmental space. This is a space of growth. So again, go crazy. Whatever comes into your mind as far as good questions as we go through each of these 3 areas, throw them out there. we're going to have lots of time to kind of talk about them and explore in this space. All right, should I turn over to you for the activity?
Hello, I'm Elisa Levitt, and I'm from Portland Community College. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I hope I get a chance to say hello in one of the concurrent sessions today or tomorrow, and I will say hello. Have you say hello to Ken Friedrich, is also from Portland Community College. So PCC students, please say hello. Thank you. So as you already got the gist, the activity that we're facilitating today is exploring and developing research questions and interests. The format's going to be similar to the one yesterday with Dr. Adams-Wiggins, the identity and career paths. So that's why we had you squish again in groups. You'll have an opportunity to reflect on your own and then share back in your small groups, and then we'll ask for some people that feel comfortable sharing with the larger group. As Tori said, this activity will provide an opportunity to explore research questions, to be curious. I noticed the word curiosity came up quite a bit yesterday, so this is an opportunity to play. That was a great way to describe it. So we'll practice asking questions and learning how these questions can guide research and analysis. So everybody should have a handout at this point. Does anybody not have a handout that needs one? Okay, great. So you should all have a banana on your table as well. So your group's been given a banana, and you just have an opportunity to play and ask questions. Think about what questions you might have about this banana. And what are some interesting questions you have? As Tori mentioned, you're not going to be graded, so it's okay if it's not perfectly phrased. It's an opportunity to fail, fail with gusto, and just explore and think. So number 1 on your handout says to individually take a moment to write down 1 or 2 questions about this banana, and then you'll share your questions with your group at your table. So we're just going to take about 1 minute. I know that's not a lot of time, and that's okay if you haven't came up with the perfect question. It's just an opportunity to start kind of thinking about it. Okay, so we're going to are there any questions before we begin? Yes. Oh, you don't have a banana? I should have asked if y'all had a banana. There's more banana. So raise your hand if your table needs a banana. Okay, everybody has a banana? Awesome. Okay, so we're going to start the timer. So you have about 1 minute to just kind of individually think of some questions or a question. We are at a minute, but by the sound of things, it sounds like you've already started sharing, which is fine. So this was the point where we were going to take about 8 minutes for you to have each person share at your table your questions that you came up with. Which sounds like they're already doing. Okay. I'm just checking in that we're about halfway through, and we will ask a couple groups to share. So also think about which questions you would feel comfortable sharing with a larger group. So about 4 more minutes. Okay, we are at our 8 minutes, and we are looking forward to hearing what you came up with. I also just wanted to remind us from Dr. Adam Wiggins' presentation yesterday that they said that our identity also affects the types of questions we ask and the way that we look at things. So I wanted to mention that before we begin. Okay, who would like to start? All right. Oh, okay, sorry.
First question.
Yes, please.
How do the sugars in the banana crystallize to hold it together?
How do the sugars in the banana crystallize to hold together?
Yes.
Thank you. We're just going to list them right now.
Hello. How does the banana protect itself from invasive species?
How does the banana protect itself from invasive
species.
species?
Yes.
Thank you.
So our question was, is a banana peel edible? Why or why not?
We were just talking about that. So yeah, is a banana peel edible? Why or why not? How many more do you want?
Why is it yellow and why is it shaped like that?
Why is it yellow? Why is it
How much wood? No, sorry. I was curious about the question of facets. Why does it have like, this ridge between peels, and the question of whether or not it's pentagonal, or what if any cross section shape that it ends up having, and why?
How many species do we know of can safely eat it?
Nice. Okay. 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 How about one more?
Is it GMO or organic?
Oh, no, it's okay. Okay. How do your brains kind of feel like they did the stretching activity? They kind of. All right, cool. So let's turn the page. And this next page, you should have a graph with some data in it. So now I want you to use those same thinking muscles and see what types of questions come up around that graph that you have been presented. And we'll give you the same 1 minute to come up with your individual question before we move to that 9 minute period for you to talk as a group. So 1 minute. Okay, so it's been a little over a minute. So now if you want to discuss as a group, take some time and chat with each other, see what types of questions, share out your original. Would folks like a little bit more time to think about their individual question? Okay, we'll add a couple minutes. You can continue to think. I didn't know if that would actually be like, maybe it would be. Right, so reading the indirect verbals and nonverbal cues, it looks like folks have moved into the group phase. So we'll go ahead and start that kind of 8-9 minute period to discuss as a group. So continue on. All right, we're at about the halfway mark, and just like before, when we get to the end, we'll ask a few groups to share out the questions that they came up with. So just be prepared for that piece. All right, I think we're at a good point where we can share a few questions. Are there any groups that want to share what they're thinking. I see one up here.
We have a couple. The first that is here from Neil is the high melanin linked with cancer?
What was that?
Is high melanin in the skin linked with cancer?
Okay.
There was a discussion about vitamin D being harder to absorb with a higher melanin content, and if that might have something to do with like how your body absorbs things or processes things and higher risk.
Okay.
And the other is there is a genetic predisposition in Black people to be susceptible to have cancer, although, what is your name? Ike told us that also in the Black community, there is like, they don't like to go to the doctor that much because there is like the racist part and they don't feel taken care of. So maybe also that take, like, is a great point, I think.
Okay. Got one group behind us, Arjun. And then I see a group in the way back.
So we had a couple questions. One kind of encompasses a lot of what everybody was thinking. Does the defense come from environment or lifestyle choices or lack thereof? And the other part has to do with, like they were saying, with the stigma. Is it stigmas being passed down? Because I know, especially coming from an African-American community myself, that that's not something we're really taught. You know, go to the doctor, you're kind of taught to just fend for yourself. So how much of that is passed down?
Okay. Table way back there.
A question that we had was like, how does socioeconomic standing affect your ability to get treatment, not just affected by your race, but also by your sex?
Okay.
Hello. Okay, so we were discussing a lot of things, mainly like in the cultural and genetic side of it. So we were thinking about like, so how would their diet play a role in it, or how the different regions see. So we were going into that for number 3 as a group, blah, 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 how you would learn more about this. So we were thinking, so we would need to get specific focus groups. We need to take into consideration, since we are looking at different races, we have to consider, are they mixed, are they full, what specific region are they in, and what access do they have to, like, what their diet is, what access do they have to food, what access do they have to medical attention, and yeah, so those were things we're thinking of. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that is, we have one more table up here.
We were curious as to how the data would look if it wasn't age adjusted, and you could look at specific smaller age data sets, and also how rates would look in different countries that have a wide variety of ethnic backgrounds, such as Canada and Australia, and compare it to a baseline of more monocultured countries in which they have more consistent ethnic backgrounds.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to add in a piece that we forgot to add in from the last activity. Question number 3. So that discussion of sort of some next steps, which I think this table had already been thinking about. Now that we've got a couple ideas of some interesting questions, what types of things would we have to do if we wanted to try to answer those questions? So I'm going to give you 7 or 8 minutes to explore there before we move to our last little practice activity. So take a few minutes, think about question number 3 as a group. About 3 more minutes to discuss the second activity before we move to our last one. All right, let's wrap up our conversation around this exercise. And I'll have Alyssa move us to our third exercise.
Okay, so by now you should know the drill. So our last exercise is on the diabetes graph. So we'll do the same process as before. Spend a little time thinking on it on your own, and then we'll spend a minute doing that, and then we'll have you share. Okay, seems like you've been in group mode for a little bit, so we'll say 4 more minutes, and then we'll ask a couple groups to share again. Thank you.
All right, now it's time. Oops. Got really loud. Okay, we would love to hear from a couple groups again. Who's ready to share? Although it sounds like you're having so much fun, I kind of don't want to stop. Okay, go ahead and raise your hand if you're ready to share. All right, up here? Okay, thank you.
So we had a couple questions. One that we definitely wanted to know more about is what's the difference between East Asians and South Asians, that there's such a disparity? And two, we wanted to know if food played, like the types of food that they eat played, because we noticed that a lot of these ethnicities eat a lot of rice.
Thank you.
So how did the diabetes rates change since the 2011-2016 time period? And in that time, did some racial or ethnic groups see a larger increase than others?
Thank you.
Getting my steps in today. So I was going to ask, this chart didn't distinguish between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And so it wasn't very detailed in that sense.
Great observation.
Us as a group, we decided that there could be some problematic issues with how the data was collected as a whole, because it's a little too vast for it to be, you know, centralized on these ethnics as a whole. So, like, what's the difference between like Hispanic and Mexican? Like those type of disparities in the collecting of the data.
Thank you.
We were just going to ask how the data might look different if the sample size was much larger, since that's such a small number of United States population.
So same as well as how the data was taken, because
Sorry, can you wait just, okay, now, go ahead. Sorry, I wasn't able to hear.
it's okay, because Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Central American, and South American all are Hispanic, and there is an only Hispanic bar. So is this data real? Is like something that we really can take seriously to study?
Thank you.
Hello? Okay. So in our group, we were wondering, like, why weren't Asian Pacific Islanders included in this study? Because in the last graph, it was included, but not in this one. And then we were also wondering, like, does gender play a role in this? And like, how many individuals were like, that did this, that was part of this study were like really, really old, or like 20, sort of. So it's a little yeah, we just noticed that it was like a little vague. So that's what we were wondering about. And also, how does this data change if it had been conducted at like a different country? Like if the data was conducted in Australia, how does the data change? If it was conducted in Canada, how does that change as well?
Thank you. Okay. Oh, it looks like there's one more in the back, and then we'll move on to number 3.
Oh, there we No? There we go. Going back to the question that they were just talking about, the one over there, what does non-Hispanic other mean? Like, is it a bunch of people? Why does it not like me? Oh, okay. That's the question.
Thank you. Sorry for the technical issues, but I think we were able to hear your question.
The question was, what does non-Hispanic / other mean?
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to number 3. So just kind of discuss again, if you were to explore one of those questions more deeply, what would you need? What would you do? Okay.
My clock is right. It's 10:34. We got till 10:45 or 11:34. So we've got about 10 minutes, which keeps us still mostly on schedule. All right, let's bring everybody back together. How are folks' brains feeling? They feel a little worked out? Is there like some brain sweat that occurred? Okay, that's a good thing. Y'all had some really great questions, so we wanted to take a moment for Alyssa and I to just kind of share back some feedback and some thoughts and ideas around all of the things that different groups shared. So some things that I noted, there were some STEMish questions and some public health questions, and so especially when you start looking at things like some genetic factors, but then culture, racism, environmental pieces, those are good examples of where folks that are maybe interested in psychology, public health, some of those, the other part of our science selves and the hard science, biology, chemistry, genetics, those are places where they can intersect, and those also make spaces for collaboration. So that's why we have so many different types of students in the same room, because you may not have that public health background to be able to be thinking about these questions in that particular way, but you may have the technical skills to help answer a question, right? So that was really nice to see come out naturally. Some questions that you may have felt like they were not sciencey questions are really only a couple of steps from being a question that sounds like what a researcher would say. So like the how do bananas protect themselves question would probably turn in to something like, do banana secondary metabolites inhibit herbivory in insects or mammals? That's a research question that is out there. It's super, super interesting, not uncommon. Data set questions, those are places where computer science folks often get engaged. I always like to tell people that as a biologist, I'm horrible with a computer, and they still want to give me a computer. But with a little bit of help, I can make things happen. I just can't look at 1,000 genes and tell you what's going on without the help of a data scientist of some sort. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is that we've talked a little bit about how people show up in the research and how their lenses show up in the research. And you can see that in the effects, like some of the effects of how people end up showing up in their research is showing up in the graphs that you looked at, right? Around who's asking the questions and how that data is presented and how groups are being categorized and which groups are being targeted and highlighted and left out. Like you can see some of that appearing in those two graphs that you looked at, and that's why y'all are here. So that there's somebody in the room to ask, like, is this the right category? Or why did we put these people in this category? Or why are we like talking about these people but not these people? Or how come y'all left out my entire community in this analysis? Like, these are good questions to be asking and be thinking about. So I'm glad that y'all caught those. And I'm going to let Alyssa share her thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I agree. There were some amazing questions and very thought-provoking. And also a lot of questions linked back to the social determinants of health, something that yesterday Dr. Olvera Alvarez listed the social determinants of health and spoke to briefly, and also his discussion around human nature too. And my background is public health, and so these are just things that we discuss in public health classes at PCC, so it was really nice to hear your thoughts. But one thing I'm even more curious about are the questions that we didn't hear, and whether that's because you maybe didn't feel comfortable sharing in your group, maybe you didn't think it was good enough, or maybe you didn't want to share with a larger group. And I think that's something that we want to consider, and that we hope that you will get placed and find a space where you feel comfortable asking questions and finding a program that meets your needs and allows you an opportunity to feel comfortable as a researcher. And to remind you of what amazing researchers you are and questions you came up with, we have some silly fruit stickers to hand out to you. And you're welcome to do whatever you would like with them. Put them on your notebook or wear them or give them to someone else. But there should be enough for everyone. Is that it? And we know we don't want to keep you from lunch. So in a moment we will transition, but we are hoping that you will spend some time on these reflection questions on your own, and they're on your worksheet. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. It was great to sit at the table and get to hear everybody's questions and kind of dialogue about these.